Mr. Dorfman, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Mr. Ariel, welcome. The South American theme of this year's Boekenweek and the publication of Mr. Dorfman's latest book, Konfidenz, were both excellent reasons for us to realize that the time was ripe for Mr. Dorfman to speak in our lecture series, American Focus. My name is Anne Wertheim. I'm the director of the John Adams Institute and organizer of the lecture series, American Literature Today and American Focus. Our institute holds about 10 lectures each year, which mainly feature American authors and speakers, and in exceptional cases, we are proud to invite members from other countries, or speakers from other countries, better to say. Tonight, Mr. Dorfman, who is both, in my opinion, American and South American, will share his work and his views of the United States with all of us. Mr. Dorfman's book, Konfidenz, has recently been translated into Dutch by the Bezige Bij. Death and the Maiden will appear in translation in May. I would like to thank the Bezige Bij and the Embassy of Chile for helping to make this evening possible. I will now hand the floor to Max Arian, editor with De Groene Amsterdammer. After Mr. Arian's introduction, the evening will continue in the form of a discussion and conversation between Mr. Dorfman and Mr. Arian. In about an hour, we will have a short intermission, and following the intermission, Mr. Dorfman will read from his latest and newest play, which has been finished 2 days ago, I believe. And the play is called Who is Who, and it deals with Hollywood. In the second half of the program, we will also take questions from the audience. And if you wish, you can write your questions down and leave them at the bookseller's desk here in the room. Mr. Dorfman has agreed to sign books during the intermission and after the evening is over. Thank you. I hope you enjoy your evening, and I would like Mr. Arian to take the podium. The floor. You stay there?
Yes.
Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd rather stay here because when I do an introduction, I think I will be stopped after just some words, so the conversation will start in the middle of the introduction. So we'll see what happens. Ariel Dorfman is very well known as a professor in Spanish and Spanish-American literature. He has been known as a political activist, Chilean political activist in the time of the Unidad Popular, 1970 till 1973. He was in that time very, I don't know what's the word in English, berucht, wereldberucht critic of the mass media, of television and comic strips. He made notorious, yeah. But then you cannot make the joke, but all right. Especially for his book written with Armand Matelaar, How to Read Donald Duck. Then he was known as a Chilean exile after the military coup by Pinochet in 1973. He was a teacher and a writer also here in the Netherlands from 1976 till 1980. Later on, living in the United States, he was a very outspoken writer, as well a journalist, as a columnist in the United States for newspapers like the Village Voice and the New York Times, Los Angeles Times too, I think. When he could go to Chile now and then, sometimes with dangerous situations, but always writing in a very moving and impressive way. Then he became more known as a writer, as a Latin American writer, as one of the outspoken Latin American voices, especially after the publication, and I think the English translation of his novel Widows in 83, and later the last song of Manuel Sendero. And he became even more famous as a playwright, as a Chilean playwright, because Des and the Maiden was written in Chile after the democratization and the election of a democratic president, Elwin, about the whole process. But the play became a big world success. It was played in I don't know how many countries and how many times. And it was also filmed by Polanski. But still, it's a peculiar situation to have him here in this distinguished series of the John Adams Institute, because they bring American writers, and they mean by that writers from the United States. And that makes me think about Ariel Dorfman, because his life he has lived in the United States in different times. He has criticized the United States, the culture of the United States, the policy of the United States, especially the foreign policy. But is he an American writer? Is he now? That's my question. Don't answer it, because I'll tell a little bit more. Is he now an American writer? Is he now somebody from the United States? To give you some facts, Ariel Dorfman was born in Argentina in 1942. Then his parents, who came from Eastern Europe, by the way, went to the United States, almost flee to the United States because of Peronism. His father was one of the people working in the founding of the United Nations, but in the 50s, the time McCarthyism, it wasn't so well for him in the United States, so he got a job by the United Nations in Chile, and Ariel has been really growing, living his youth in Chile, and became, as I said, so much involved in the campaign for the election of Salvador Allende, the Unidad Popular, which was a combination of left parties, Socialist Party, the Communist Party, some smaller parties. That's also why he had to move from Chile after '73. Had to flee the country to Argentina, then 2 years in Paris, and lived for 4 years here in Holland. And then he did go to the United States, and some of his Dutch friends thought that it was a kind of going to the enemy, because in this time, still 1980, it was, we saw the United States as imperialist power threatening the world. And what is more, he's living now for 15 years, mostly in the United States, teaching in the United States in Duke University in Durham. He's somebody who's really an expert on the American, it's always difficult with this word American, United States culture and mass media. As far as I know, but we'll ask him, he's more or less bilingual, Spanish and English, from Mascara. That's a novel that was published in 1988. At first, his work was always written in Spanish and then translated by others into English. But from Mascara onwards, he translated his work himself into English. But I think it's always written in Spanish. He became really quite well known, I think, in the United States. And now, and that's also why it's interesting and curious, and I think an interesting moment to have you here. We make a fresh start in Holland. De Bezige Bij has translated his last novel, Konfidenz, from English. I think it's the first time a novel of his in Holland was not translated from the Spanish edition, but from the English edition. It's translated by Jacques Commandeur. It's done very well. He also made a new translation of Des and the Maiden, the play that was done by the Rood Theater 2 years ago. And and I hope they do more books of him. So it's really a question. What does it mean? Have we a new Ariel Dorfman, an Ariel Dorfman from the United States, an American author, or is it still the same Ariel Dorfman, or is there a gradual process of becoming less Latin American and more somebody of the United States? Ariel, you may.
First, I would like to say that I'm very pleased to be here at the John Adams Stichting Institute. And I feel very comfortable with John Adams, who was a revolutionary North American. And I have no problem with the second president of the United States. I have some problems with other presidents of the United States, but that will we come to at some other point, you know. But that's their fault and not mine. Now, the question of how American I am, or how Latin American I am, or how United Statesy I am, should first of all, I think, be put in two different contexts. The first is how American is Latin America becoming. When you have, I'm just saying, you know, if you go to Mexico and you see that the older people are celebrating the Day of the Dead in the traditional Mexican way, and the younger people are celebrating Halloween, you begin to ask yourself about levels of different consciousness that are clashing all around the world in relation to American culture, right? So, one question about identities in relation to nations today is, I think, that we must begin to ask ourselves about the problems of nationalism, transnationalism, borders, and sovereignty of different peoples, you know, given the economic globalization, the cultural globalization of the world. I just want to put it in the context of a whole tendency in that sense, you know. But I think that what I'd like to do is perhaps zero in more on my own experience. I am Argentine-born. I became a Chilean citizen because it was my desire to do so. In other words, I am more Chilean than many Chileans because I decided to adopt that country. And as far as I know, I will never renounce.
Adopt you? You adopted Chile?
Well, I think they adopted me. I think they adopted me at some point. But once again, who was they? You know. So my situation is, I just want to very quickly go through what you told. But it's that I arrived in the States, and I became not bilingual, but I became monolingual when I came to the States because of a long series of experiences, which it's not a business of mine to explain. I had a trauma when I came to the States. And I renounced the Spanish language when I was 2.5 years old, thinking forever. For 10 years, until I was 12, and I went to Chile, I did not speak one word of Spanish. It was in me, but I was there. So I got rid of my Spanish, and I tried to remake myself as an American, you know. And I wouldn't answer when my parents spoke to me in Argentine Spanish. I understood what they were saying, but I wouldn't answer to them. And if I became a Latin American, it is because Latin America seduced me, and in a way, I always use these terms because I think it has a lot to do with it, made love to me in some ways. You know, it brought me into that, and I fell in love with a country. I fell in love with one particular woman who some people here know, who's my current wife and future wife, I suppose, forever. You know, we're married 30 years, Maria Angelica. I fell in love with a culture which was that of Chile and also of Latin America, because I think that I am very much a product of really being enchanted by the Latin American writing. That was a way of naming a whole continent around me and giving a meaning to that. But particularly, I fell in love with a cause. I fell in love with a people, with what we call el pueblo chileno. In other words, I fell in love with a group, a collective, that said to me, it is possible to change history, we will do it.
So you fell in love with a kind of utopia, an illusion perhaps?
No, it was not an illusion. No, it was very much a reality. Whether we were right or we were wrong is an entirely different matter, you know, but what we were doing there was very concrete, and it had a lot to do with things that are coming out of the 60s. In other words, it's the liberation movements that come out of the 60s that say people have the right to take into their own hands their own culture, their own life, their economy, their politics, etc. That this failed, the experiment of the United Popular failed, is something that we can talk about Yes or no? And one of the
Has to do
contradictions
with the United States.
It has a lot to do with the United States, without any doubt. It has a lot to do with our own failures and with failures in the way in which the United States intervenes in the foreign affairs of countries.
But then your choice to be a Chilean was really a political choice.
No, it was all these choices I'm telling you. In other words, I fell much in love with the Chilean loco, the shellfish, as I did with the Chilean woman, as with the cordillera or the smell of a flower, as I did with the idea that this was the place where history had put me, and this was the place where I was prepared to live and to die.
But the Chileans don't like this loco at all. I mean, they had to be, there was propaganda at the time of Allende to have them eat merluza and other fishes, and they didn't want to eat the fishes. So you're more Chilean than the Chileans, like you said.
No, you're wrong about the loco. No,
all right.
They liked it so much that we almost exterminated it. No, we like the loco. We don't like fish that much, but fish a bit. But what I mean by that is, you fall in love with many things of a country, but you've got to understand that it comes from somebody who speaks the English that I do, and who had adopted one nationality, and then a day came, and a strange day because it happened in the United States. The United States has been central in my life. I went to Berkeley, California.
As a student?
No, as a research professor, where I was finishing my second book, and I was writing still in English at that point. And one day I realized that that everything about me was, or supposedly I dreamt that it was, Chilean. And as drastic as the decision had been when I was 2.5, 25 years later, with exactly identical but perversely opposite desires and ferocity, I said, I am resigning the English language forever. I will never write another word in English ever again. Soy chileno, I'm going back home, you know? This was in the midst of the revolution in Berkeley, you know. The point is,
68,
69. I was there in the middle of it all, you know. I seem to fall in all these places. I hope there won't be a revolution here tomorrow, you know. Yes, I doubt it. But anyway.
And then the revolution that didn't take place in the United States was there in Chile, under your hands.
Well, it was there. I mean, but we knew it was coming. And in a sense, so my return to Chile was very much the return to what I considered my choice of country and of cause. And I'd like to say that, strangely enough, I think, and it may be that is why, a secret reason why, I have such an extraordinarily loyal relationship to the Chilean past and the Chilean revolution. Because many of my ex-comrades are saying, you know, what, Allende, it's no importance whatsoever, they're very ashamed of it, etc. I have no shame whatsoever. We killed nobody, we tortured nobody, we did nothing in that sense. I feel very proud of having been next to Salvador Allende during those 3 years and in the midst of the Chilean people. And when I went into exile, in fact, when I met you, you know, by then, and other people who are here, the people who are here, I found that, in fact, I was becoming more Chilean the farther I was from Chile. Mm-hmm. And I wrote probably my best works in Spanish in exile. Because while I was in Chile, I was doing other things. You know, I was writing The Hard Rain that you see, I was writing the Donald Duck book, etc. But of course, there you have it. That's the paradox, and that I'm working on at this moment, is that when I begin to write the book on how to read Donald Duck, which becomes the major bestseller of the 70s in the whole of Latin America, it sells 700,000 copies in Latin America, becomes a classic textbook in the schools, I'm not only analyzing American culture, I'm analyzing who I was in the past. It's a way of reading my own childhood, because I had that inside me. Perhaps more than other Chileans did.
But you seem to hate this United States culture. So even kind of a harmless person as Donald Duck, I mean, you make a whole book about what an enemy and an imperialist he is.
Well, you know, as I say, and as you say in your own introduction, Max, the point about this is it's not Donald Duck that I'm worried about. It's the system behind Donald Duck. Now, I don't know if we should spend a long time speaking about 20, because I wrote that 25 years ago. In one sense, that book is as prevalent as ever today, because now we have a real global world culture. In another sense, of course, the book could be read as, I could read the book as a continuation. Konfidenz is a continuation of it. To give you an example, I realized after reading that book that in all my books, there is always a very strong uncle or father figure behind everybody, manipulating everybody. There you have it, you know. You can find any continuation that you want. So, but what I'm trying to get at is the structure of my life is a structure where the United States is a constant condition of my life, personally. It also happens to be a constant presence in the relationship between Latin America and the United States. Because I go there because my father is an anti-fascist and he's running away from Perón, who's a proto-fascist, right? I leave because McCarthy is getting rid of all the left-wing people in the United Nations. Then many years later, I have to leave again Chile because Nixon and company are trying to get rid of Allende. Mm-hmm. And then you could say that when my return to Chile happens, you know, and it happens in very different ways, I come, it's strange, you know, Max, you yourself have seen it, but when I come back to Chile, I come protected by the Americans.
Yes?
Yes, I mean, yes, because I realize, I'll tell you a couple
because
of stories.
you were writing in
Because I'm writing in the New York Times, because the CBS comes, CBS Morning News comes and films me. Mm-hmm. So I am going along the streets of Chile with all the soldiers around me, beating everybody up, but they won't touch me. I'll tell you a little story about 1983 when I go back to Chile. There's a very, very paradoxical relationship, you know, with my own country, in which I am the one who's been criticizing American intervention, and then American intervention is the one which allows me to go back. But 1983, what happens? I go back to Chile for the first time, and I go back, and the day after I go back, I have to sit down 2 days after, I have to sit down a very difficult thing. I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times. So I write an op-ed about the New York Times, and it's a ferocious criticism of Pinochet for the opinion, you know. And at that time, there were no such things, you know, as faxes or ways of getting material to them directly. You had to read into the telephone. There was a sort of a recording machine at the Times where you would read, and they would get the little you know, they would get what you did, and then they would transcribe it, and then your editor would call you, Howard Goldberg, and we would have a discussion about it. So I was in my sister-in-law's house, and I am reading this critique about Pinochet, that he's destroyed the country and that the only thing that remains are the birds that sing in the same way. I mean, my typical, between lyrical and political style. And you know, and everything has changed in the country, and 40 people have taken over the whole of the country, and that's all that's remained, things like that. And it's very, very strong about this murderer who's still in power and all these things. And Rodrigo, my son, who came back, the whole family came back, as he hears me do this, he goes by the door. I can see it as if it were yesterday. It was 1983. And he looks at me, and he says, "Ooh, wow, you know, I mean, you're really strong." And I'm saying to myself, this is fine, because as soon as I've clicked it off, I'm fine, they can't touch me, you know? Not only with CBS, but I've given the thing, if they do it, it's because of reprisals and things like that. And I finish dictating this, and I wait for the man who is the one who registers, or records it, you know, on the other end. He says, "Mr. Dorfman, there was a glitch in the machine," he says. "Could you do that again?" And the second time, you had to have courage. The first time, no. The first time was sort of like, you know, there was no courage involved. I mean, it was blind. I was crazy because they can do anything.
Think about it.
Right. But every word, I had become sort of vulnerable. And then I went to my friends and I immediately set up something I hadn't set up, which was a system whereby every hour and a half I would call it a number, which would then call another number, make sure I was okay, you know? So it became a very strange relationship with the United States where they were giving me protection. And when I was arrested in Chile and deported, basically because of having been against Jesse Helms on TV with David Brinkley and with Ted Koppel and anchoring shows from Chile and things like that, it was the United States which told Chile that they were not going to have the undersecretary go on a visit unless they allowed me back. So it becomes a very, very strange world where the United States becomes because of events that had to do with Nicaragua, I think, in a great measure. But it had to do with a strategic sense of what is democratic and what is convenient for the United States in relation to its own struggles in Latin America.
But how is it now to live in the United States? Because my impression is, perhaps I'm an old-fashioned leftist, that the climate, the political climate is very right, that the Republican Party is winning, and it's a very rightist Republican Party, that Clinton is very, very isolated, and that the whole atmosphere is of a not of a very nice country, but perhaps I'm wrong.
Well, once again, Max, you do not decide, at least I no longer decide, to stay in a country or to leave a country because I do not like or I'd like the regime. That's not the point of why you decide to stay somewhere. You stay in a place because you have a certain amount of roots there, because you are able to do certain things there that you cannot do in other places, and because basically, once again, it's a very complex relationship, you know.
Because roots? You have your roots there in the United States?
Well, at 2.5, I began creating roots there, and I have roots there. I mean, I know what the milkman thinks, you know, and I know who Milton Berle is. Now, other people may not know who Milton Berle is, but I happen to know that. I mean, I'm a person who has a double life in that sense. And I'm able to do things in the United States that has given me opportunities to do certain things that I cannot do in my own country. Now, the point about going back to Chile...
You still cannot do in your own country.
Well, but the point is the following. When I go back to Chile, and when I've gone back to Chile several times, and I've gone back to live in Chile several times.
Yes, in 1989, I think.
I went back in 83, and then in 89 I went back... I went back in 86, definitely, for 6 months, and then I was arrested and I was deported. So, I mean, I've been re-exiled a second time. And when I went back in 1989, 1990, I went there for 8 to 9 months and intended to remain there. I have a house in Chile. I have half my library is in Chile, half my library is in the United States. You know, it's a very, very strange division, and I'm divided, and that's what my life is. But I went there to stay. And what I found was that I did not quite fit into that country the way I wanted to fit. It's probably much more my fault than Chile's fault, you know? I mean, I'm not blaming Chile. I felt very hurt by this.
Because you were much more in love in this Chile before and during the Allende Revolution, and not this Chile you found in 1989, 1990?
No, the point is, I love the same things of Chile that I always loved. But the country has become a country which is partly unrecognizable, but partly it also has to do with what I want to do with my life. Putting it in terms of where my life has gone, my life has been a shuttling back and forth between two countries, really, between two continents, between two languages. And what
you forget Europe?
Well, no, but it's a triangular relationship in that sense. But you know, if I have to ask myself, what are the two major focuses of my life? The central movement is a relationship between the United States and Chile, Argentina, between these two entities. Now, I am Chilean. My passport says I'm Chilean, and I feel very Chilean. The question, of course, is...
You still feel very Chilean.
Yes, but I feel very Chilean, but what does that mean? What does Chile mean? The point about Chile is that one has to define, Chile has got to define how wide they consider themselves to be in relation to all the options. It's a very precariously democratic society, and it's a society where I really stand out. I stand out in the sense that I'm not as Chilean as I thought I was. What I've decided in relation to my life...
Or too Chilean.
But look, you know, I mean, this would be a discussion. I mean, I'm writing a book on this at this point.
That's nice.
But what's the important thing to understand at this moment of my life is I have got to understand, I have got to accept, and that's why the English and the Spanish and the going back and forth and the using of both the languages is so important. I have got to understand that I have come to a new vision of what I am and what I used to be. My life has been determined by the following facts. During many, many years of my life, until I was 30 or something, I thought that English was going to be the language that I would use forever. For many years after that, I thought Spanish was the exclusive language. I have now come to the conclusion that I am not going to relate myself to that, and the metaphors that I use is that I am married to two languages. I'm not married to necessarily to two countries, but I am married to two languages.
And you think in both languages?
I don't think in any language.
Huh?
I don't think at all. I have a hole in my head. No, seriously.
You don't know in which language.
I think in the language that I'm speaking at the moment. Now I'm thinking in English, y ahora estoy hablando castellano. And I can hablar of this way, back and ida y vuelta. I mean, I can go back and forth like this as if I were a ping pong. I have almost two personalities. And the book I'm writing about
but
this,
that's
I'm writing in English in the morning, in Spanish I'm writing the same thing in the afternoon, because they're very jealous. The language is no, you see. I killed one language, and then I killed the other language, and now both languages are inside me. Ahora están los dos adentro de mí.
Yeah, but interesting is, are there two personalities? Are you a different writer in English from Spanish?
Well, I try to make believe that not. And I think Death and the Maiden, Konfidenz, Mascara, which are the last sort of things, are written in Spanish, then I rewrite them in English, then I correct that back. So I sort of go back and forth, and I create one text, a text which is sort of, all of these are not very localized. This is the famous universal Ariel Dorfman who reaches Korea and Israel and who's translated, etc. But it has to do with the fact that I myself am a product of trying to find an imaginary space where both of these languages can signify in the same way. But now that I'm writing this book about the languages, where they're the protagonists.
That's your new novel that
No,
you're
no,
writing
it's not a
on.
novel. No, it's a memoir, it's a meditation. Now that I'm writing that, they are jealous of each other and they will not let me. I know this sounds very strange. They're like characters. I'm bigamist of languages. I'm living with two languages. And they cooperate all the time. For the last 10 years, they've been cooperating. They're very nice about this. They're very courteous. But when I try to tell their story, they want to be first. So I have now come to the excruciating, exhausting, bizarre, and absurd thing of having to write the same book twice. Because otherwise they're going to drive me crazy, And I'm doing it that way, At the same time, I'm writing, perhaps at dawn, I write a book in a novel in Spanish. But that's all right, because my last play I wrote it in English for the first time. But to do that, we talk about that after the intermission, about how that is.
Then we go into, but perhaps we can talk about Konfidenz, because there's something strange. Right? There's also a Spanish edition, isn't there?
Oh yes, I wrote it in. I'll tell you, I wrote it in Spanish first.
Give me some.
Oh yes, please. I wrote it in Spanish first, and one of the things that I have been trying always to do, I have been very, how to put it, I have been extremely loyal to the stories of Chile that were born out of Chileans' pain. I'm very, very obsessed with these stories. They are the ones that move me most. They're the ones that have most clash. Like Widows, for instance, is an example, or The Last Song of Manuel Sendero, or even Máscaras, which is really a meditation on, psychologist friends of mine say it's the novel which most speaks about the idea of Chile as public and private, about the perversion of a world where nobody can show their face, and nobody has really a face, where the world is divided between plastic surgeons who change people's faces and anonymous men who take photographs of the most obscene moments of people's lives, and where this goes back and forth, and where you fall in love with a little girl who has been abused. I mean, all very, very strange things happen in this world. So I have been very determined by very particular things about the Chilean experience. And I know when I go back to Chile, and when I went back to open Death and the Maiden there, and I was going to go with Sigourney Weaver, but she got sick, and in a way she did me a favor by being
film,
sick.
you mean?
The film, I was there in that theater, and I realized that my past was there. The most important past of the world was there, That I was, once again, wedded to that experience. That I was responsible in some way. And it doesn't matter. I don't have to determine how I act in relation to that country, how that country acts in relation to me, because I have enough people there. I'm responsible, I mean, I have to have a perturbed relationship with a country, because I think writers need that, and countries need that as well, And countries don't need heroes, but I think they do need pains in the ass, and that's what I am. So
but now Konfidenz.
Listen,
the title of Konfidenz, it's neither English nor Spanish, I think. It's something that looks like German. I don't know if it's a German word, but with this Z at the end and this K at the beginning.
Yes.
Is it German? What is it?
Well, in fact, I don't know what it was, because there's a word in Hungarian which is Konfidenz, which István Szabó turned into a film. So I wanted to get something Germanic. I wanted something strange. What I wanted a title where when you went into the book from the very start, you felt that you were entering a terrain which was somewhere special. somewhere else, no matter where even for the Germans it's somewhere else. And I wrote the first 70 pages so that you did not know what time of the century it was, and you do not know where the exiles come from. They're in a hotel room in Paris, and maybe perhaps I should just read a piece of it and explain. But I wrote it first. I wrote it first in Spanish. Then I rewrote it in English, and rewriting in English had the following extraordinary thing. I took a third of the novel out. There was a whole situation which I took out, a whole second novel which was in there. Because to rewrite in another language is like giving it to another reader. It's another Ariel who is there, you say another personality. So I was able to read it for a second time. I mean, I rewrite 500 times each page over and over and over again. But here it's as if you're allowing a stranger to come in and say, look, this doesn't work, it doesn't translate well. I can't translate it. So it's a way of getting a second look at the novel. And then I rewrote parts of it in English, and that I rewrote then in Spanish again. And I have two editors simultaneously, It's the first book that I do this with.
In two publishing firms.
In Planeta in Argentina and in Farrar Straus in the United States. So I did two versions, and this is the first book of mine where the Spanish version and the English version are quite different. Well, in the last Song Manuel Sendero, there were also certain changes between the Spanish and the English.
And in Hard Rain you shortened?
Oh, I shortened it, yes, but that's because I was in the Argentine embassy during that part, and I wasn't able to shorten it. Cortázar, who gave it a prize in Argentina, said to me, this book is a wonderful book, but I just put together lots of stuff there, so I cut out a third of the book when I did it into English. But that's a different story. What I mean by that is this is a book which very consciously I was trying to create one space for it. Now, the first 70 pages, as I say, are pages which do not tell you where you are. And what I wanted to do with that very consciously, first of all, it's because I really didn't know. I couldn't decide. I wanted them to be Polish, and I wanted them to be running away from the communists, and I wanted them to be Chileans, and I wanted them to be running away from the anti-communists. And I wanted a mirror reality in which you didn't know, and the reader everywhere would have to decide for themselves who these people were. And then it's supposed to be some sort of a surprise when you really find out who they are, why they are there. But by then, I hope, it will have become contaminated with the stories of other people. Because I believe also that this book was in some way, I believe this of all my books, when they say that there's such a thing as a muse, it's very strangely true that something takes over and possesses you totally. And I feel that I dictated to, that somebody was telling me the story, and then I had to get it right, because somebody had died, and some ghost was speaking to me. And I felt this very, very strongly in relation to Konfidenz, perhaps more than in any other book I've ever written, I think. Perhaps except for the poems of the missing, where I also felt, that the dead were really speaking. They had chosen me as a place where they could meet the living, because I was that bridge, And I'm, as you know, I'm obsessed with the idea of giving a voice to the dead and to many who are as if they were dead. But also I wanted to play some games, confidence games, with the reader. And I've always thought that, I'm a rather weird sort of writer, because I write about themes that are very political, very brutal, very naturalistic. My work is full of pain and suffering and resistance at the same time. At the same time, they're very experimental works. So, like many of the writers of the 20th century, I'm trying to bring together a stream of a vanguard, a vanguard experimentation in relation to language, and simultaneously something that deals with the erotic political dominion power problems of relationships between both the sexes and the state and the individual, and how there are consequences to that. And simultaneously, I am obsessed, as you know, by popular culture. So, ever since Death and the Maiden, I have been working towards the search for spaces where I am able to speak to enormous groups of people, and yet, in no moment, stop being very perturbing in relation to that. And all my life I've looked for that possibility. Mm-hmm. In a way, you could say, what I'm trying to bring together is this no bullshit North American way of writing, in which you reach the people, you sort of market, you get to people, and a very Latin American playfulness. And of course, this is not true. There's a Thomas Pynchon who plays around enormously, you know, and then we have a series of Latin American writers who write very directly. But I'm saying there's some sense in which I'm trying to bring together the mass media approach in which I compete with Walt Disney, really, you know, and I go to Broadway. I'm the first Latin American who goes to Broadway or does something like that. I'm the first person who does that sort of thing. And my new play is exactly in that direction now. We'll talk about that later.
Perhaps it's
Confidence.
a good moment to read about out of Confidence.
Confidence is a very strange book to read from because most of it is in dialogue. It's a 9-hour telephone conversation with interludes in between. But let me just say the following, that a woman comes into a hotel room in Paris, and her name is Barbara, and she's come from a country we know nothing about. We don't know where she's come from. We don't know what time of the 20th century it is. And the phone rings, and there's a man on the other side of the line. And Barbara has come to Paris in order to help her lover, Martin, who is supposedly an architecture student there. And this man who's on the phone says that he's Martin's friend, and yet he seems to know very, very much about her, seems to have prepared her trip, seems to have sent the chauffeur to get her, etc. So I'm going to read a little part of the last subsection, and then I'm going to read you a little interlude and the little part as well. But it's a lot in dialogue. So it's organized in a very, you have to imagine this. There's voices which are floating on the telephone.
It's a woman, a young woman.
A young woman.
And then perhaps somewhat
a somewhat older man. But we don't know too much about them. And as the novel progresses, in some senses, the more that we know about them, the more puzzled and mysterious it all seems. We seem to know less the more we go in, which is what happens in very many love affairs, you know. Anyway, so Barbara is getting very, very excited about the fact that this man seems to know so much, and there's a very calm, very strange voice in his voice. His voice is very strange and very special in that sense. And after she's got very excited, you know, but but what's happened to Martin? What's happened to him, etc. The voice says, the man says, and I'm going to try to play both voices. Okay, I go here. I think you're overly excited, Barbara. I should have given you time to unpack your suitcase. You'll find your favorite perfume, soap, everything you need in the bathroom. Take a shower, change clothes, and I'll give you a call in, let's say half an hour. No, tell me now. I'll give you a call in half an hour. Wait, don't hang up. How can I know you'll call me? How can I trust that? You've heard my voice. You know about these things, about people. Is there anything in my voice that suggests I could harm you? No. You really mean that? Yes, there's something special in your voice. You can't know how happy that makes me. I'll call you in half an hour. She hears a click, and then the long, tenacious buzzing of the dial signal. I see her remain like that for a while with the receiver close to her ear. Afterwards, she hangs up and lets her eyes roam around room 242. It is as empty as ever. And then there is a very short chapter in italics with another voice. And this voice says, someone is there. Someone is watching them, trying to watch the woman in that room, trying to listen to the voice on the phone, someone else, someone with plans for them, a man. For now, this is all you can surmise about him, that he is male and that he has plans. As if that man on the phone and that woman in that hotel lived outside your will, as they would have existed somewhere, yes, but where? Even if you were not transcribing this text already written with their bodies. That is why at times the story simply flows from your fingers, as if it were not possible to make a mistake, as if you were no more than their faraway secretary in accident, a mere intermediary. At other times, you are not alone in this task. That is when you feel the possibility, the remote breath of his presence, of that man watching. When you wonder what they really have said to each other over the phone, when their voices become muffled, and yet you are responsible for getting every word they say right, exactly what that man who calls himself Leon told that woman, what she answered, when each word begins to fade before it can be written down or even read, it is then you become aware of somebody else who also guesses at their conversation, tries to examine who they are, what they will be doing. Of that somebody else, you know next to nothing. Not even his existence is certain at this stage. But this you do know. If he does exist, that man who tries to watch has no interest in writing their story. He has other plans for them. So we have a triangle in which we have this man and this woman, a man seducing a woman over the phone, a woman either letting herself be seduced or resisting it. You have another voice watching this, helpless, and a fourth person, a man, who is watching all of this. The only advantage that the narrator has to help these people in that room is that the man who is watching, who has tremendous power in that world, doesn't know that the narrator exists. That's the only advantage he has over him. And it goes on very quickly. I just want to show you. Almost before the telephone rings, she answers it. Barbara? Yes. Are you comfortable? Does it matter? It does. I'd rather you weren't standing. How do you know I'm standing? If you lay down on the bed, you would feel better. I have no intention whatsoever of lying down on the bed, or anywhere else for that matter. Please, Barbara, you know lying down will help you feel better. As long as you don't wrinkle your blue dress. There. Isn't that better? Who told you about my blue dress? Who do you think told me? Martin, but he never cares about these. You're not going to deny that blue is your favorite color, are you? Can you hold on a minute? The woman stands up, goes to one of the windows and looks out. Almost in front of her, clinging to the second story of the building on the other side of the street, a scaffolding rises. When she arrived at the hotel less than an hour ago, a crew of workers was noisily making repairs. Now they are no longer there. They must have gone on a coffee break. She closes the curtains vigorously. Room 242 darkens. A ray of light so thin that it is almost non-existent filters between the curtains. I don't see her switching on the lamp. She picks up the receiver again. Before she speaks, she lies down once more against the soft pillows on the bed. Next to her, I see a camera. I don't see why you're so interested in the color of my dress. It's always important to know how the person we're talking to is dressed. You know how I'm dressed, but I don't even know your name, your real name. I'm sorry. That's something I can't reveal, just yet. Ask me something else. How old are you? That depends. What do you mean that depends? That depends. Most people count their age on the day of their birth. I'm not like them. I began to really exist much later. And it goes on in this fashion for a long time until history erupts, unfortunately for them and for me and for all of us, rather violently into their lives. And of course, once history does erupt into their lives, I'm forced to reveal, in a way, where they come from. But I'm hoping that by then they will have become part of a repeating pattern of lovers through the 20th century looking for each other and constantly being interrupted by forms of repression that are persecuting them. You know?
Because it's clear that they're exiles, that they flee the country where there's repression. You have been yourself an exile in Paris.
In Paris, yes, I was.
Does it have to do with your experience there as an exile, as a political activist at the time? I don't think you were making love by telephone to young girls that came from Chile, but perhaps...
I refuse to answer on the grounds that it would incriminate me. No. You see, the Americans, the Fifth Amendment. No, the truth is I was not. But this comes from, in fact, a very concrete experience, which is very typical of the way in which I write. And so I think it's worth telling this anecdote because it's very much the story of where confidence comes from, at least the story of confidence, how it comes. And as I say, this in general is what I do, is I take something that really happened, that I saw, that I imagined, and I twist it and push it, right? Much, much more. So In this case, I was in fact in Chile. I was in Paris for 2.5 years. And when I was in Paris, one of the things that I was doing with the Chilean resistance there was I was receiving young men. I received no young women in that case. There were mostly men who were coming out of the country. And what they would do, what these men who we'd call salmones, because salmons always go back home, you know, so they go there and they go back to the source. The salmones that we were calling them, they would come out for a year. Supposedly they were coming out to get a grant in Paris to do to go to work there or to do a study or something like that. But the truth is they were going for military clandestine training to probably Cuba or Korea or the Soviet Union or some place like that was friendly to the Chilean resistance. And so what we had to do is, during 1 week we had them, we had to create and construct a false year for them. And we had to make believe, because they had to fool two people. They had to fool the secret police, who thought they were in Paris. I mean, not that they thought, they just had to create that. But they also had to fool their parents, their friends, their lovers, perhaps their wives.
In Chile.
In Chile. Because it was very dangerous. And of course, confidence. Do you have confidence? Do you trust? It has to do with the fact that when you are fighting a dictatorship, you lie to save your life. And then, of course, the lies come back to haunt you, right? But if you don't lie, they kill you. So the point is that what a dictator does, and what evil always makes you do things that are not the right things in order to survive. Like Billy Budd, Herman Melville, here we go again, you know. What I'm saying is that this experience was one in which one of the salmones that came happened to be a young man who had been himself one of my students. So I happened to know his real identity. It was impossible not to know. There were people you knew, people you didn't know, who they really were. And therefore, he was able to confide in me things that he wouldn't tell other people. He had to tell me anyway things. And he had his young girlfriend, who he was very much in love with, and he was cheating her, in the sense. He wasn't cheating her with another woman, he was cheating her with an identity.
She was still in Chile.
She was in Chile, and she would never know about this. And he was saying, what will happen when I go back? How can I possibly do this, you know? And I had to read his letters. And I thought to myself at that point, what an extraordinary situation. If I were in love with this young woman, I could steal her. I said to myself, now, it's a very perverse feeling. And as I always say, it's good that I write, because then I don't have to live these things, you know? I'm very much in love with my own wife. I wouldn't do those things. But the point is, what happens if you are in love with that woman? What happens if that woman happens to be in terrible danger? Which is the situation that happens here, or that he makes believe. Of course, it could all be an enormous Scheherazade story, right? Because there are many other theories of what this man wants with that girl. He creates many different possible theories.
Oh yes, he could also be in love with her, and then
he could have been in love from before. He could have dreamt her from before.
He saw a photo.
It could be his daughter. You can never tell. There are many, many different ways of how this is happening, you know? And we will, I hope, find out towards the end. At least I give hints of what is the truth of this. Mm-hmm. But the point is that I found myself when I began writing it, what I found interesting was that I had chosen Paris because it was the place where it happened, where all exiles always go through Paris. And I found that it was a sort of a twisted Cyrano de Bergerac situation, in which you have an older man with no face really, but in this sense cloaked by the night, and these two lovers, in which he has the real voice, he's the real poet. He seduces her through the letters.
Because he's writing letters.
He's writing the letters.
Martin's name, yes.
He's taking Martin's, and all of a sudden this girl begins to fall in love, really fall in love with the writer of the letters, who is this man who has a situation. And
because he's a kind of ideal lover. He's better than her real lover.
He's at least his voice is more interesting, you know, in that sense. Now, what happens when they get together is a different story. But the point about it is that we have this situation, this triangle, and I'm always interested in finding a situation in which, in this case, this is what I call a post-dictatorship novel, even if it occurs during exile of dictatorship.
You could not have written it during exile, because
Impossible.
you are criticizing those exiles, those political organizations that are also manipulating and give the opportunity to do perhaps as much harm as the dictatorship does.
That's exactly the point. The point is that what I wanted to do was to find a situation where what this man who is persecuted himself, who is manipulated himself by his own party and persecuted by other people, who has a problem in relation to the state and in relation to the different resistance organizations. So he's, in a way, he himself is being hunted down. This man who is a hero in that sense, who is trying to save this young girl, however, this same man is doing to her things that with feminist theory we would understand as creating a master narrative for her, right? He's dreaming her in a certain way. He's trapping her in a certain way. So I create a character who's in the middle. I create a complex character who you are with him and you're not with him. At the same time, the woman seems to be this innocent girl, but who knows if she's not a spy herself, if she herself is not working. You know, so the point is, I try to go to the utmost consequences of what it means to live in a perverse universe. When you have a dictatorship, the dictatorship sickens everybody who touches it. It sickened me. It made me literally sick.
Opponents of the...
Even the opponents. That does not mean that we are the same as Pinochet. I'm not saying we all have a Pinochet inside us. But I'm saying that what makes it difficult, what makes us human, what makes us truly heroic in relation to this struggle, is to recognize this imperfection that we have. Now, I think the Death of the Maiden had trouble in Chile because it did exactly that. It took a country where nobody wanted to recognize what was happening to themselves. The pain, the tremendous pain in Chile just jumps out of you, you know. You can't stand it, that it happens there. People don't want to look at it, and I don't blame them. I don't want to look at myself, you know. But I'm stuck with it. I can't help it. So I create a fragmented universe. Now, here is one step further towards that study of the idea of trust. Because I realize that as my utopias fall, as I become disappointed in the way in which we construct structures that then end up being oppressive, but not always, you know, because I'm not of that sort. I haven't ceased to think that we need to absolutely radically change the way in which the miserable world works, you know. I have no problems with that whatsoever. I'm very proud to think of that. I'm a utopian democratic socialist, you know, and I feel very, very clearly. And I feel very much as an American in that sense.
But
you know?
how can you
Eugene
be?
Debs.
Because if you're writing on manipulation and people manipulating each other, it's even worse in socialist and communist societies.
That's what I'm saying in this book. I'm saying in this book that's exactly so. But the point about this then is, where do I go? Where does anybody go? Well, one of the ways to go is to become totally cynical. To say, absolutely, where we live in total solitude, we live in a hall of mirrors, everything is a delusion,
but
and everything is a
we
illusion.
can read this book as a very cynical book on human nature.
That is the problem of the reader. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to give, and I'm fighting all the time, the problem of, do I hope or don't I hope? Do I believe this man, don't I believe this man? Is there hope or isn't there hope? Is something that I as a narrator decide. But I say I decide it for myself. I don't decide it for you, for the reader. So I leave it open, because what I think of the aesthetic work as work that I'm asking the reader to do. But I just wanted to go to the idea of the utopia. There are two utopias here. One is the utopia of constructing a better society, in which I absolutely believe. What I think is that there are these movements. Now, these movements are made out of human beings. And every movement starts with a movement between one human being and another human being. And if there is a chance, one place in the world, for one man to trust another man, for one man to love a woman and a woman to love a man, or men to love each other, if this can happen, I think you can change the history of humanity.
Yeah, that's true, but it's a nice conclusion. But
no, it's not a
when
conclusion.
I read a book, I wouldn't trust anybody who is in there. But that's just.
But then what you do is what I do is I go radically to the utmost form of betrayal, and the utmost form of identity hiding behind and behind and behind, which Mascara has been doing, and which Death of the Maiden has been doing, in which, as it says Death of the Maiden, in order to tell the truth, you have to lie in a country like Chile. Okay, you play these games, right? And as I myself, as a novelist, I take a fiction and I say, oh, you think it's true? Here I go, I'm a magician, I'm doing all these things. But in the midst of it all, I say, let's search for those spaces. And in that sense, you know, I think there is nothing else that as a novelist I have to do. I look for ways in which I can construct those meanings. Now, I may fail or I may not fail, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying not to lie about how we relate to one another. Because, you know, what happens to me, Max, is that in my life, I'm extremely, extremely trusting. As you know, I have very, very close friends. I have a wonderful family who I feel very close to, you know. I'm, in fact, very often a person who's laughing all the time, you know, and I enjoy life very much. As soon as I sit down, these monsters come out. And I have to be true to them. I'm not going to lie about them. As you know, when I was in Chile in 1973, instead of Hard Rain, I was writing a novel about dictatorship. I was writing a novel about a dictatorship that was going to be in Chile. And I'm not saying I burnt the novel, but I put it aside. I said, I told you this, remember, I'm not going to write this novel because it isn't going to come true. It's not so. I refuse to write a novel in which we're going to be defeated. And I was right with what I was writing. I was wrong to put the novel aside. Never again in my life will I stop writing something that I see there. And I may be wrong or I may be right. But most of my novels, unfortunately, become prophetic. I said that the missing were going to appear many, many years before they were going to appear. I filled my words were filled with dead bodies, and then the missing appeared. I'm not saying they appeared because I saw them. But if I had written a realistic novel, a novel in which I look at the world and I say, this is the way the world is, behind every one of my works, there's some sort of a utopian strain. And I think this utopian strain, by the way, is very much American and very much Latin American. The difference is, of course, that we in Latin America, nosotros los latinoamericanos, los americanos, digamos, we have this urge towards utopia, which I think is a much more urgent need for this, because we're so much farther from it, you know, because reality is so much closer to hell. But the United States is coming pretty close to hell. And therefore, I think utopians are, most of my American writer friends are no longer jealous of all the terrible things that are happening to me, because so many terrible things are happening to them. The worst of times create the best of literature very often. But it's better to have the best of times than the worst of literature. But that's, I guess, the way it is, you know.
Listen, I think it's time for the intermission. I hope you intrigued the people in the audience so much that they do buy your confidence to look for whatever utopia or hell is there. You're going to sign, I think, here. If somebody wants you to sign, you may put questions in writing. You may do that in any language, anyhow, in Spanish or in Dutch or in English. And later on, there will be time, I hope, to get spontaneous questions from the floor. And we start about the place after, but we'll see what happens. The intermission will be 1/4 of an hour, so we start again at 5 minutes, 9:25.
At 9:25, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Same thing.
I don't understand this question. Oh no, it's in Spanish. Oh, no, it's not.
We don't know much. We don't know much about the speakers. Maybe I was on the phone. Tampoco los conoces, tampoco como los... Okay, I can...
Yes? We'll start with that, and then with this question.
You want to start? You want to start with questions? Or you want to start with the? You start with the questions.
We start with the questions, and then we go to the play. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
So there we are. You must be tired of signing all those books, but all right. We got some questions, and I think one of the questions it's about Konfidenz. So I would like to have that first, and you may read it because it's bilingual.
It's bilingual. It says, "Pregunta para Ariel Dorfman dijo." And you said we, and the person underlines we, don't know much about these two people that are having a conversation over the phone. And then I will read it in Spanish because we should. Esto quiere decir que usted, mientras escribe, tampoco los conoce, sabe tan poco como los lectores. So it says, does this mean that you, as you write it, don't know them either? Do you know very little or so little about as the readers do? And the answer to that one is complicated as usual. It's when I start writing, except for one novel, which is Widows, where I knew how it began and I knew how it ended, and I didn't know how you got from one to the end, from the beginning to the end. I never know where it's going to end up, ever. The reason why I write is because I want to find out. So I believe that in the first little sentences, if you've said them right and thought them right, you explore and explore and explore, and the truth will come out of that. Thank you. Thank you. So, but in this case, something very, very strange happened to me, and it was that I sincerely did not know. The reason why it's written this way, in which basically it's as if I were a camera watching this scene happening, is because that's the way it came to me. And the fact that it came to me could be, in that way, could be due to many things. One is it could be that having been so dedicated to watching my own play over and over again in rehearsals, etc., I found myself sort of like an audience member watching something up on a stage. Or because I had been working with screen, because Konfidenz is written during the time after Death in the Maiden becomes this world success. And it's a way of going back to my own, the control that I have over my own work, you know, in the sense of saying a novelist is responsible for every last word. A dramatist basically depends on how the performance is. And please, if you get involved with filmmakers, you know, it's very rare that the vision that you're going to have will be your
the film director decides, not
film. Basically, I mean, the film director decides, fighting it out terribly with all the money people who are dreadful, you know. But so the point was, Konfidenz was in great measure a return to some form of control. But strangely enough, I felt as if, in fact, I had hardly any control at all. Of course, I'm writing that. And yet, I did not know who this girl was, this young woman. And I did not know who that man on the other phone was. I had some ideas about him. But he was hiding from me as she was hiding.
And you know now?
I have an idea. In other words, I think I know much more about them. But the point is that as the novel progresses, I have to make certain decisions, right? Because, you know, novels swim in time. And time is made out generally of catastrophes that happen or lagoons of time that flow. But at some point, you know, something happens. And in the case of Konfidenz, while they were playing with one another, while the seduction was happening, he says to her, she says, give me lots of details. Tell me things about yourself. And give me 100 details, because I'll know if you're lying. And he said, I could give you 1,000 details and I could be inventing everything. So because, of course, we always invent ourselves over and over again. So I found myself with these two, this man and this woman, who were playing with each other, who didn't want to show their real face. And as the novel progressed, I decided that I would believe the man and that I would believe the woman in certain things. It's a decision I made. It's that thing that I'm speaking about, faith in the other human being. And this has nothing to do with the social system that we live in or anything of the sort. It has to do with the fact that two human beings, if they can trust one another, I think that they can create something new. And I was believing that. And so, in a way, I got to know them. But in another way, my characters, if they're real, are like other human beings. And I feel as if you never get totally to totally know anybody completely. Perhaps so, even yourself, you don't know yourself completely.
And as a reader, you can feel differently from what you are thinking about them. Perhaps we know them better than you do. Listen,
it's possible, yes. It's
because
very possible.
Perhaps if we go along with talking about Konfidenz, I mean, people still have to have something to read themselves. The second question I like to do, because it was a question I had myself in a little bit different way. But let's get the question. As a novelist, what books are you reading or are you planning to read? And what is your favorite genre? And may I add something to it?
Yes.
Do you feel yourself in the literature of the United States, or are you very strange from the literature in the United States, and you're still, are you coming from the? What are you reading yourself?
Well, for instance, at this moment I'm reading a book by a man called Richard Powers called Galatea 2.2, which is a North American, very talented North American novelist. And I just finished a book by Osvaldo Soriano called La Hora Sin Sombra, who's a very talented Argentine novelist. And I have a book by David Lodge called Changing Places, which, I mean, there are 3 novels by 3 different people, you know, in that sense. and I'm reading a play by Don Margulies. And I'm reading all sorts of different. Don Margulies, who's a very good, very interesting playwright from the United States. So I mean, I read different things. I read a lot of newspapers. I read a lot of novels. When I would say that I spend 75 or 80% of my time reading novels. I love to read novels. And in relation to what my favorite genre is, it's the one I'm writing at the moment that I'm writing it. As you know, I'm very prolific. I've written poetry, which I've stopped writing, though I wrote a poem for Sarajevo a year and a half ago, because I felt that it was necessary.
But it's 1,000 days of the...
1,001 days, the 1,001 nights, which is... It's strange because it's the last time I saw Joseph Brodsky alive, and it's the last time I saw Christopher Reeve. So I hope all the people who went there are not going to be, stricken with some sort of terrible sickness of some sort. But I did a poem then, and I've stopped doing journalism for the last 4 years, almost entirely. The last thing I did was, in fact, the Los Angeles Times published my poem as an op-ed because they wanted to publish something of mine. But I've stopped doing journalism for a while, and but I'm working on a novel now. I'm working on a meditation, which I haven't written, let's call it serious nonfiction, for quite a while now. I just finished an essay on Polanski for a book of writers who write on directors, and I just finished, in fact, a play, and that's what I'm. And it came out of nowhere, and I felt that I had to do it. I'm also work on some screenplays that I do with my son Rodrigo. This is a very strange thing that's happened.
Yes, we have seen one what was ordered by the BBC.
Yes,
and it's a beautiful film, and it has to do with Death in the Maiden in a different way.
It's like the second part of Death in the Maiden. It's the BBC approached me to say that they had a wonderful story, a very interesting story, which John Hurt was going to star in for an English television, and I had never written for television. And as I think I told you, I don't know who I told, but one of the things I'd like to do, because I'm very ambitious and very greedy in a way in relation to writing, is before I die, I would like to try every genre possible. As I told you, I'm thinking about doing an opera, perhaps with Peter Sellers. I'd love to do a ballet. I would love
a ballet.
A ballet, to find words for a ballet, working in that sense. I find it very interesting to find different genres, perhaps because I'm so much in crisis and a fluctuating identity. I have these two languages and these two cultures, and I go back and forth between them all the time. But I also have all these voices. I mean, I'm a poet, and I write novels, and each novel, every novel is written in a different voice. You hardly could tell from the style that they're identical. There are some things, and I write stories, and so it depends on what's. The only thing I do know is that something has got to obsess me very, very much, because it's so painful for me to write. What I mean painful is that I am not lying about this. Now I have a bad back and I'm growing a bit older. But before, it used to be that when I'm in the midst of writing something, I can write 18 or 20 hours a day, and I'm not lying about this. Because the world is not complete. It's as if, you really have this godlike relationship with these creatures. At the same time, it's as if they're saying, well, they wake you up and they say, hey, how about me? Don't go to sleep. Don't make love. Don't eat. Come, here. I have to exist. Give me existence. It's a very strange feeling. And I have a feeling that the world is a void. For instance, at this moment it isn't. Because I took a week off to come, to Holland, but I go back and then I begin to obsess with these things. So.
Yeah, and the strange thing with you is that the more obsessed you are, the more success you have. That's strange. Normally, when somebody's very obsessed, he makes something lousy. But you made this crazy Donald Duck book, which was such a bestseller, and you made Death in the Maiden when you were obsessed by what happened in Chile.
Yes, but look, I'm obsessed with the unborn, and the last song of Sendero has not been a great success. I mean, it's appeared, I think, in 6 or 7 languages, but in all the languages, it's never You know, and it's the book that I like most.
Yes.
I like most the idea of the unborn children who go on strike, you know, but clearly this book, which is made out of 4 different, you know, and Dick Bloomrad, who was the translator, is here tonight, you know, all these different forms, you know, which go together, but it's a book that I adore that, but that's my obsession, you know, and the point is that you write because you're obsessed, and what others do with it, whether they buy it or they don't buy it, it's absolutely their affair. And I love it when I'm successful because it means I'm communicating, I'm desperate to communicate. And it also means that you have a chance of getting things staged or you're getting things to more people. And you know, you have a chance of entering the struggle for the world and for the word and for changing things and for being changed yourself.
But
So-
I don't want,
Yes.
for one reason, if people want to put questions about it, that's all right,
Yes.
but
Yes.
we talked already about it. So
Maybe we should go and talk a little about the play.
Yes, and about theater, because
Theater, yes.
at first your plays were adaptations of your novels, I think. It started with Widows. Somebody asked
Widows,
you,
yes.
and then
The Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles asked me to adapt Widows, and I did it. Finally, it became so difficult to do it that I had to do it with Tony Kushner of Angels in America. We adapted Widows together. But there's an example of a play. Look, this is a play written by myself with an enormously popular play, and by Tony Kushner, who is perhaps the hottest, you know, dramatist in America today. We can't get it staged. 22 actors.
No.
17 women on stage. Nobody's interested in disappeared people, you know. They're not interested in it. So it's very difficult to get it on. Maybe the Abbey Theatre will do it, you know. Franco Rossi wants to do perhaps a version, or Cacoyanis wants to do a version. You know, you look, but it's very, very difficult to get it staged because it's very expensive. So epic plays are very difficult to get staged no matter who's done them.
and then I think you were working on
I was
Reader,
working on Reader.
and then you suddenly
Suddenly-
came a play that was
I wrote Death in the Maiden. Yes. And then after that, I completed Reader, which I then opened Edinburgh, which is now
Last year at the festival.
at the Edinburgh Festival, and then it's already opened in Copenhagen, and it's going to open in France. I have a couple of other places, and I don't know yet what's happening in Holland, but we'll see. And there you have a play which is a very, very difficult play. It's a very complicated play, and it's, from my point of view, it's
Reader.
It's Reader, right? Reader, the Reader. It's about censorship. And what I do, and I have this tendency, by the way, Max, which is I want success, but I'm very scared of it. In other words, I don't want to repeat what I did in the last thing. Because what I could have done is I could have taken the theme of censorship and done Death in the Maiden 2 and Death in the Maiden 3, The Return of the Doctor. I mean, look, no, believe me, it's very, very possible.
the Son of the Maiden.
No, the pressures for me to create a work that will be as successful as the previous one, or will be, in that sense, is very, very strong. It's very subtle, but it's very strong, you know? And Konfidenz is, I think, of a novel which has great possibilities of being very popular, but at the same time, it's a novel which plays very much and which demands of the reader certain things. So, I mean, I think that what I'm trying to say is, look, I'm writing the way I wrote. When I always say this about Death in the Maiden. I wrote Death in the Maiden thinking it would have some success, because I think, you know, you were there, you know, just after I'd done it. I said, I think I hit the nail on the head this time very clearly. But everybody around me in Chile was saying that I was crazy, that nobody was interested in this. Who could be interested in this story about this mad woman who's been tortured and who takes this man and, you know, thinks that he is, and you speak about torture, and you don't know if he did it or he didn't do it. You don't know if she's killed him or she didn't kill him. Crazy. Nobody will want to stage that at all, they told me. Really, you know? I mean, that's gone. Nobody's interested in those things. And I said, I'm interested in it, you know, this is what I write. So I felt very rewarded by the fact that, in fact, not looking for success, it came.
Yes, it came in London. Even before it was done in Santiago, there had been a reading, very small, I think,
very small
for
reading,
index on censorship.
It was fundamentally it was a reading for the ICA.
What's the ICA?
The ICA is the Institute of Contemporary Art in London, you know. Linda Brandon, who afterwards died, some years afterwards, invited me. And it was a very select, very special group. You know, Peggy Ashcroft was there, and Peter Gabriel was there, and Harold Pinter and John Berger, and a series of people were there. And I heard it, on the stage, and I realized that I really had hit that nail exactly on the head. I had smashed it more than hit it,
And then you came back to, and then it was brought in a small room and then bigger and then in West End. But then you came in Santiago and it still was no success in Santiago.
It still was no success there. And then I went out and Harold and Peggy Ashcroft had sent it to Peter Hall. And there you have a typical example, of my absolute pig-headedness. And I can remember this very well. I think I've told you this story, but I don't think I've told it publicly. Anyway, Peter Hall, the great director of the Royal Shakespeare Company, the National, etc., and he calls me up and he says, look, I like your play very much, but I don't like the ending. And I think we have to discuss the ending. And we talked and we have faxes back and forth. And finally he said, Ariel, I don't think you want to write the ending that I want you to write. And I think we should stop. And I can remember going to Maria Angelica, my wife, and saying to her, it's happened again. I mean, this is going to be the story of my life. I just refuse to do things the way people want me to do things to be commercially successful. And I'm going to be forever a writer who is well known in certain circles, and I'm never going to get to a large audience, ever, And she answered me, said, then change the way you write, don't complain. You want to write that way? And I said, yes, this is what I want to write. This is who I am. She said, well, great. Then that's who you are. Don't complain about it. I said, you're right, 4 months later, we were the hit in London. 10 months
ending
later,
you always wanted?
with exactly the same ending. I didn't change a comma in it. On the contrary, And 10 months later, Glenn Close, Gene Hackman, Richard Dreyfuss, with Mike Nichols directing, were on Broadway, where you were. We won the Olivier Award, and it came in 63 countries, with, I think, 70 performances already in Germany. I mean, it was much more than I could possibly imagine happening ever, It was a play which had no sense that it should have been this successful, in that sense. But clearly, I touched a nerve there. But I did not want in my next play, which was Reader, which I was doing, to do a play which was clear. That play is about identity. It's about how you censor others and you censor yourself. And I'm putting on stage a human mind, which is evolving in different ways, and the actors are playing different roles, And then I did another play, which is a Caliban.
Oh, Caliban.
Caliban.
You want to make an opera from it?
Well, I think that's what I'd like to do, is do an opera. That is my idea, is that it's more of a sketch of a play than a real play as it is in this form.
And you talked it over with Peter Sellers?
I've talked it over with Peter Sellers, and we'll see. Once again, he's very, very busy, and I'm very busy, and I called him, and I haven't had an answer back.
But he's a wonderful director.
He's fantastic, and we get along very well, but we'll see. And then
Perhaps you say some words about Caliban, because he's a figure from Shakespeare's play The Tempest.
Yeah, well, but it's simply that it's a play in which I start from the premise that if Caliban were alive today, he would be a street child in Brazil, and he would be out to kill Shakespeare, because Shakespeare really did him in. He left him on that island without a mother, etc., etc. So he's looking for his father, and his father is Shakespeare, and he's out to kill him. So it's once again, it's not the sort of play in which you're going to get very popular, especially with the British, I think. But however,
but it's like Babar going out to kill the old lady.
Yes, but Babar doesn't.
No, that's true.
That's
but you did.
No, but I like the old lady. I've mellowed with my time. I've become very. I am in love with American popular culture, very, very much so. Now, in between, with my son Rodrigo, we began working together. We did the BBC play, and he adapted my novel Mascara with me for the stage. And we now have a version which we're going to open. We have a workshop in Arizona. We have a director who's called Michael Bloom, who has done the plays of Don DeLillo and Arthur Coppett. He's an excellent North American director. And we'll probably be opening somewhere in, like, the Public in New York or someplace like that. This is a very good play for Holland, I think. It's about this man without a face. And to make a play about a man without a face who takes photographs, and a plastic surgeon who is his rival, and a split personality woman who has a woman inside, it's a very interesting play. And then I've been working on this meditation on my bilingualism and all this. I've been working on that for around 2 years, but the last 8 months I've been working on it almost every day. And I've written 500 pages maybe, and I'm still on the first page.
In what language?
In the two languages. That's why I think I solved the problem. Because I was writing it in English, I was writing it in Spanish, I was going back and forth, and I think I've solved the problem now. And now I think it's going to be easy, but I've said that before. Anyway, in the midst of that, I went off to Chile. And
that was last year?
This was at the end of last year. And I went to see my parents who are in Argentina, and then I went to Chile. And I had always been very, very interested in a phenomenon which is only Chilean, at least as far as I can tell. And in fact, Max, if you don't mind my telling the story.
It's too long.
Okay.
No, please don't do. It's nice
It's a nice story. There's a story. There's a story. The basic thing is that in Chile, there's a strange phenomenon happens, and that is, Chile is a country where there's a thing called páginas sociales, the society pages. They're like the who's who pages, but ever since the end of the dictatorship, towards 1989, when people began to surface again, all the newspapers began publishing, for instance, let's say tonight, they would come from 3 periodicals, and they would photograph us. And they would photograph somebody who was a bit famous and somebody who was not very famous and the daughter of somebody. And they put them all, and then there's these pages. And everybody looks to see themselves in the pages. It's very, very important. They're called the páginas sociales. And and I felt that this is a very, very strange phenomenon. And I always felt that this was the taming of the unruly elements in Chile, because everybody wants to be in the páginas sociales. You may be an anarchist, you may be a terrorist, or you may be a banker, and you want to be in the páginas sociales. You want to have your picture there, taken, And of course, my picture was very rarely taken because the newspapers thought, that I was not exactly somebody to be put in páginas sociales. Slowly but surely, as Death in the Maiden becomes more and more popular, I become more and more in the páginas sociales. Now you can't keep me out of the páginas sociales, So I made it in that sense, But the point is, I found this to be a very interesting transitional phenomenon. And I always thought I would write a newspaper column about it, provoking people in Chile and sort of, saying to them about this and making a joke of it. And then in Chile, I was looking at these páginas sociales, and now it's become absurd. And also, friends of mine who do the páginas sociales tell me that there are these people who buy these things. In other words, so they go to the editor and they buy it, and really, a newspaper has become solvent because, let's say, you're opening the Nike shoes in Providencia, and grand opening, and you see all these people, who nobody knows except their neighbors, but they're there, So it's like. And I thought this is very interesting. I'll contrast that with my real obsession with this disappearance, right? The idea that everybody is disappearing. All of us are ghosts. But also, there are people who really physically have disappeared in Chile. And I thought this is an interesting thing to happen. So I invented an old woman in a newspaper that I made up, who's the head of the páginas sociales, She's a crazy, loony old bitch, really a real crazy woman. And she's dying, or thinks she's dying, or something like that. And she wants to find out who is going to succeed her in the páginas sociales. So she's making all these maneuvers, and everybody wants to kill her, or she thinks everybody wants to kill her. Okay. So I said to myself, look, I know the plot. I've got this great idea for a plot. It's a real twister, right? I mean, the plot is the same one in relation to the surprises in it. No, because Max is...
But it's very... because it has nothing to do with the páginas.
Wait. No, this will tell you.
I'm the only one who read the play, I think.
You're the only one in the world who's read the play. I finished it 7 days ago. No. And so...
But it's a wonderful play. So.
Well, thank you. But this will indicate a bit how my mind works in relation to just language. But it has to do with this. It's that I've decided that I will not decide ahead of time what language I will write in, that I will not blame myself for using one language or the other, that I will enjoy the enormous richness of the doubleness of my life, because not many people have this unique experience. And it may be that the future is that, or maybe the future is going to be fundamentalism forever and monolingualism. People are going to kill each other because they have one shade of skin different. Maybe, But I hope not. I hope we're going to be mongrels and hybrids and crossbreeding, all of us, That's what I hope the future is going to be.
But what happened was that you didn't write about Páginas Sociales.
I did.
You were writing about Hollywood. Not about Chile.
No, I did. What I did is that during 2 months, I wrote 5 versions of this play. And I said to Angelica, who is my angel and also a demon in relation to how she reads me, she said, this is not working, she said. I said, I'm writing this only for Chile, I don't care. All I want is a sort of a farce for Chile, a thing in which I make fun of everybody, and including myself, and it wasn't working. There was something really wrong with it, I was getting very serious. I was bringing the desaparecidos in and all that, and Angelica was saying, but hasta cuándo, this is, you're returning with these themes again. This is not something, this is the wrong way, And she said, look, Ariel, don't you think that it would be time for you to grab this same theme, and why don't you stick it with a casting director in Hollywood?
It was Angelica's idea?
Yes, Angelica's idea, One night we were, I was sort of desperate because I had written it so many times, and it really wasn't working. There's a quote from Antonin Artaud, and he says it's the French I haven't found. When I live, I am not totally alive, but when I act, I feel I exist. So I put that as the quote in Spanish, and I'd written it in Spanish, and it wasn't working in Spanish because it was becoming very literal. The characters were assuming an allegorical implication, and anything that they did, they kept on sort of doing exactly what Death and the Maiden hadn't done. They were representing social positions, and I felt that I wasn't free to do what I wanted with them, That somehow I was trapped myself in the Páginas Sociales, the social pages, the society pages of Chile. So Angelica says to me this, and I say, Angelica, it might work, it just might work. I have an idea. I began thinking about it, and we talked for around 3 or 4 hours.
About this casting director. But you have had to do very much with casting directors when it was about the film?
Yeah, the point was, of course, in fact, the casting director of my film, Bonnie Timmerman, is one of the great casting directors of Hollywood. In other words, I know her very well. She cast Heat with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. She just did that, She did the previous Michael Mann film of the Last of the Mohicans. She cast Glenn Ross. So she takes David Mamet. She convinces Pacino. She convinces Jack Lemmon. She convinces Jonathan Pryce, etc. She loves actors. She's very different from the character here.
Is she? Yes.
Oh, very different. No, very different. No, but the point was that I know these people. I know Anne Lewis, Juliet Taylor, who is Mike Nichols' casting director. And I've met these people.
Yeah, but you should know Hans Kemna. He's our Dutch casting director.
You told me.
He's worse.
And he's worse. Well,
no, he's
maybe we should make him the central character of this. So
what we were saying. Yes.
What I decided to do is, I called my son Rodrigo up, and he had just finished a project, and I said, "Look, Rodrigo, you know what? I don't think I can do this alone, and I don't think I should do it alone. Because what I want to write is a farce, and I want somebody to help me free this material from Chile. It's really about the transition of General Pinochet in power. That's what this play is about. But it's not, you see? It's not. It's about something else. In other words, the way to comment Chile is you put a play in Hollywood about somebody who is a tyrant and who you like very much or you hate very much, and you're finding out how this person creates a succession. How you do this. But what you do is, I take all the cliches of Hollywood, which I know quite well, from the inside and from the outside, and I create 5 characters. This old woman and 4 characters, all of whom supposedly want to kill her. Whether it's true or not, we don't know, because it's called Who's Who. It's like Konfidenz, everybody's hiding behind a mask. Everybody's acting out a role. Now, who is the real director of this? That you don't know. So, we have. At the end, you know, but it comes, there are several surprises. It's a twister. It's a farce. It's like, I call it a farce, a farce, a murder farce. And it has it opens with Alex. Let me just quickly explain something. What I'd like to do is, Max has asked me to read a little bit from this, okay?
Yes.
So let me read from the first scene. And let me just say something strange about what we decided to do in relation to scenery. The play opens in total darkness, and there's a spotlight on a man. And as the first act develops, there are different scenes in different parts of Los Angeles. And as each moment happens, a different part of the scenery is brought in. And when the first act ends, you find that without your knowing it, the scenery for the second act, very realistic, has been constructed in front of your eyes like an illusion. So this is the theme of the play. The theme of the play has to do with the fact that people act out a certain thing, that what you're seeing is not what you're really seeing, right? But it's all done in the following way. And Alex is on. He's super sexy, good-looking, mysterious, olive skin, dark eyes, undefinable race, a hybrid from many places. He is overcome with emotion, and a spotlight is on him very, very strong. And once again, you've got to realize, I've never read this before. I'm a horrible actor. I'm the worst actor you can imagine. I'm a good performer of my own things, but this never been read before, and I have no idea how it works or not.
You.
Believe me. Max trapped me as usual. And Alex says, and he's acting badly, so he's not even a good actor, so maybe. He says, what is this strange place? It's so dark. What is this? Mary, is that you? And Alex kneels down beside an imaginary body. There's a body, but there's nobody there. He says, what's wrong with you? What's this around your neck? A necklace? A red necklace? Why are you so cold? Who gave you that necklace? Your hair's such a mess. Here, let me comb it for you. I'll make you beautiful again. Just in case you haven't recognized, this is Wozzeck. It's the end of Wozzeck, okay? So we open really with a scene that comes from the first opening of modern theater and drama, right? But he's trying out. A woman's voice comes out of the darkness. It is Rachel. Thank you. That'll be enough, Mr. Martinez-Nam. Lights come up in a casting room in Los Angeles. The stage is bare except for a videotape machine on a tripod. Rachel has been videotaping Alex. I'd like to do it again, says Alex. I don't think so, Rachel says. You didn't see me. You didn't really see me. No, I saw you. That's the point. I'm not supposed to see you. You're supposed to be invisible. You're supposed to be nobody. The name of the film is Nobody. Remember? But how can you be nobody and be the star of the film? As soon as you're up there on the... That's the point, Mr. Martinez-Nam. It's an impossible role. Either you've got it or you don't. And I don't have it, says Alex. What part of me don't you like, huh? My Vietnamese grandmother, my Latino father, my Algerian mother, my Filipino uncle? Sorry, says Rachel. None of those are any good. Now, if you had a Bengalese handicapped cousin... Actually, I do, says Alex. There's a pause, then she laughs and he joins in. So Rachel says, seriously, our track record is great. This company has cast more minorities than Spike Lee. Tell you what, next month I'm doing a little job on the side. I think there'd be a part for you. What's it called? Black Opium. And what would I play, says Alex. A drug dealer from Hong Kong. I've already played that, says Alex. Says here you played a drug dealer from Bangkok, not Hong Kong. So what are my lines? You're the silent type. You get one line. They're hunting you down because you don't want to reveal where the heroine is. It's a secret. So I'm the silent type. That's why I don't want to reveal where she is? Yeah, but you get one line at the end. And Alex says, let me guess. They've got me cornered. I've got a grenade in my hand. I let them come in real close. Final close-up. I pull it. I say, fuck you. Yeah, something like that. Fuck you. Yeah, something like that. No, fuck you. And fuck this casting. It's all rigged. Everybody knows it's rigged. America's looking for Mr. Nobody. Search for the ethnic hero of tomorrow. My ass. Give me back my goddamn resume. I don't want any part of this scam. Pause. Take off your shirt, Alex. Excuse me? It's not rigged and I don't have all day long. You wanted a second chance? Go for it. You want me to take my shirt off? Yeah, it could help you, like more natural. She continues speaking to him while he takes his shirt off. I'm going to give you a hint. I'm going to tell you what this is about. You lost your shirt in the forest. You're running in circles. You're looking for the woman you love. You find her. She's dead. Later on, we'll find out that you killed her. But for now, you don't know. You don't remember. Or do you? And I've got to find her murderer. Yeah, do it. Alex starts repeating the scene in an entirely different way. What is this strange place? It's so dark. What is this? Mary, is that you? He kneels down beside an imaginary body. What's wrong with you? Rachel cuts him off. That's great. We'll call you back. You know you won't. I was just testing you. I don't want the part anyway. That's a new one. Yeah, I was worse the second time on purpose. Come on, the truth. Come on, I've heard you're the best. Rachel says, I'm not the best. You want the truth? I'll tell you the truth. You were bad the first time. The second time you were a bit better, but not much better. Not enough to have made it this far. That's what I don't understand. Out of 100,000 bit actors like you ready to kill their mothers for this part, we selected 1,000. So, how did you make it this far? Alex says, I'm special. Rachel looks him over for a few beats. Put your shirt back on, Alex. Alex begins to put his shirt on, slowly looking at her. You're right, maybe you're not the best, he says to her. Rachel says, for a 2-bit actor, you're an arrogant son of a bitch. I'm not really like that. I just thought you would find that refreshing. And Rachel says, in fact, I do. Oh, would you rather I crawled and begged? Alex says. That would also be refreshing, Rachel says. You're not a difficult woman to please, says Alex. Maybe I am, says Rachel. So you want me to call you back? Don't bother, I told you, I don't want the part. So what do you want? And the lights go slowly down on the first casting session. So these two are going to end up trying to murder the old lady for different reasons, you know. This is the assistant. She wants the old lady.
Yes, the old lady is worse.
The old lady, the old lady is the old lady does Tai Chi. She does mantras as she speaks. And she's going to hire a bodyguard called Joey, who is an actor who does gangsters, but only when he doesn't open his mouth. So the talkies killed him, you know. And then you've got Bob West, who is the producer, who also wants to kill her for other reasons. So it's all about that, and it's about the Academy Awards. And
we went to have Connie Stewart in the principal roles, the old lady. She will be wonderful.
Well, but the point is that what happened was, I found myself enjoying enormously writing in English my first play. This is the first time I've ever.
This is the first time you, in literary work, because of course articles and small columns you have written in English, but this is the first time.
No, but for instance, I wrote the Sarajevo poem. I wrote it in English.
Yes, of course.
I wrote that in English, and I've written it. And I think, I think sincerely that a lot of my journalism is literature in the sense that it's. I've done this, but the point is, that you write in the language that you need to write about. This I could not write in Spanish, and I could not write unless I was as bilingual as I am, in that sense. But there's a strangeness to it, I mean, there's a sense in which with Rodrigo we're constructing a whole play about appearances, about acting, about role-playing, about who tells the story again. I mean, it's always about the same. My obsessions are still here.
And also manipulation.
Oh, manipulation and betrayal and trust and power between men and over women and how women play roles, etc. Because when you see the play, which I hope will be soon, or you read it, you will realize that this first scene, which seems so innocent, is full of all sorts of things that are happening that you will find afterwards, Everybody is playing a role, and it's all being played. In other words, everybody is trying to fool everybody else, and there's a lot of murder and a lot of murderous instincts and violence, in there. So, instead of my now criticizing Donald Duck from outside, I'm inside, I'm part of it, I know what that world is, I'm very interested in it, and I'm writing in it such a way that I can reach a large audience. But I didn't write it in that way on purpose. I'm looking for ways in which I can create a literature which, with my Chilean perspective, really, and with my foreign perspective, can bring freshness to the American stage. Mascara is very, very similar in that sense. So I feel very, very, very comfortable in a country where I can write this.
Being a Latin American in Hollywood, in the United States, in this culture.
I mean, I don't like Hollywood particularly. But I have no doubt, this is going to be made into a film. I could cast it for you right now. I mean, not with a casting director.
It could also be a beautiful musical, I think.
Probably, we'll see. It has infinite possibilities in that sense, and that I will allow, to flow. But the point is, I feel that this is the strangeness. At the same time, in my head, this I wrote in 2 weeks. We just sat down, we wrote it. But after I had worked for 2 months, creating the characters. These characters are the same ones that I had. I had created many of these characters already. So the story was basically the same story, except that now it works.
But the setting is totally different.
But the setting is different, but that means that in a way, like Konfidenz, I can write a story about Hollywood, which can be about any transition of any person who is leaving and wants to make sure that her work continues behind her. And as I told you, Max, the other day, it's the first time I've created a woman who is not this good essential figure, you know.
Not that saint.
No saint, right? No Mother Earth here. No Mother Earth. More like Mother Courage, or like stepmother Courage. She is, you know, really, in a sense. But what I find interesting is that at the same time that I'm doing this, I have a novel, most of which happens between Santiago, Antarctica, and Sevilla.
That you are writing too.
It's a novel which I'm slowly writing, which I've compiled most of it now, and I'm writing it in Spanish. It's going to be in fact, one of the things I did in Chile that I thought I was doing Páginas Sociales that I wasn't. You know, I would go to the Biblioteca Nacional to make sure that what I want to do is there are certain dates in Chile which I'm very interested in. And what I want to do is like in Forrest Gump, in which you have this character who's there. I want to put my character exactly in certain places, in certain cocktail parties, speaking to certain things that happen, and it's a madcap, it's a totally crazy idea. And I will publish it, I will write it as soon as I finish all these other stuff that I'm doing, you know. But it's there. I know how the story begins and ends. I have the whole thing. It's a mystery story. It's a detective, a really wild detective, you know.
Hey, listen, I don't know, but perhaps there's people that have
urgent questions.
Yes.
Yes, please, I'm sorry.
I would like to. You there at the back.
I'm sorry, and bilingual and?
Could you come forward? Because
would you like to come?
It's a little bit difficult to understand.
Meditations, yes.
And that the bilingual aspect of yourself became a problem to that. And you shortly told us that you had a solution for that. And I was very curious what the solution was.
Well, my solution was that I am telling the story twice. I'm writing it in English in the mornings, and I'm writing it in Spanish in the afternoons. And they are entirely different. I mean, not entirely, they're very different. Because, you know, let me just give you a little example. And by this time I've said so many swear words that it's okay, you know. But, for instance, one of the ways that it starts in English is, I am a mongrel fucked into existence by two rival gods. All right, now, you can't say that in Spanish, fucked into existence, because it doesn't work. Because the word of equivalent of fuck just doesn't work in Spanish. Because you don't have a verb that works in that way. So you've got to say something different. Too bad. But the language says something beautiful in another way, you know. And this happened to me once. The key to it came to me when they killed me in Chile, which I think I wrote this article, you know. And,
yes.
and I wrote two articles.
Story.
One.
The news came out that you were killed.
Yeah, somebody called me on the phone
Chile.
and said, "Look, Ariel, from the Associated Press in the Associated Press in New York, they called me my office in Durham, North Carolina." And they said to me, "Ariel, you know, I just got a cable saying that they just found your throat was slit in Chile. They killed you in Chile." You know, and I said to them, and I said, I waited a second and I said, "I have waited many years to say this. The reports of my death are greatly exaggerated." No, I'd always wanted to use the Mark Twain phrase, really, you know. But this is an indication of the bilingualism, really. It has to do with this. And it was false, by the way, unless, you know,
Yes,
unless
actually.
Jorge Luis Borges is God and I am a figment of his imagination, I wasn't killed, you know. There was a mistake. They killed somebody else instead of me. I wrote this almost immediately for The Nation, and I began, reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. I've always wanted to use that phrase, because it's a great opening, you know. Once again, remember, no matter how terrible things happen to you, you know, what you want to do is you want to write well. I mean, Primo Levi, one of the greatest writers of our century, proved that, right? Here's a person who went through the terrible concentration camps, and look at the periodic table. I mean, look at the humanity and the joy that there is in that, and the craft that there is. And that's not obscene to be craftsman's like when something terrible happens. So I was very interested in that. And then, of course, I called El País up, because I wrote as a columnist for El País.
The Spanish newspaper.
Spanish newspaper, you know, which which El Mundo didn't exist then, so that was the paper. And I say to them, I'll have you in a few hours. I will translate this thing that I just did for The Nation, you know. It took me 3 days. Because as I tried to put, las noticias de mi muerte están muy exageradas, I would use this thing, you know, it wasn't working. But you know why it wasn't working? It wasn't working because it wasn't true to the Spanish language. It didn't come out of Spanish. That wasn't my Spanish experience, language experience of how my death had done. And so I started in the following way, say, de niño, siempre quise sobrevivir a mi propia muerte. As a child, I always wanted to survive my own death. That meant that I was writing from Borges, I was writing from Garcia Marquez, I was writing from El Quijote. So I was writing from a different language, and languages speak you in different ways. So when I became crazed by these two languages who wouldn't let me write it one way because they would criticize it, you know, when that was happening, I reached an agreement, I compromised. I said, look, you know what, I'll write it one way and then I write it another way, and I write 2 different books. It's very strange. I have one life, but I have 2 versions of that life, you know. And this is who I am. You know, I'm split in the middle and torn by this, disputed by these languages as if I were some sort of territory. And that's the solution I came to. But only in this case, because it's their story. So, you know, if you're telling somebody's story, let's say that you have 2 wives, okay? Let's say that you're in love with 2 women. If you tell the story of one of the women from the perspective of one of the women, the other one will not leave you alone. You'd better tell the story simultaneously of both of them, or you're in trouble. So I'm in trouble with my languages, but now I've reached peace, I hope.
I look, you had other questions, but perhaps there are other people that have different questions, or perhaps all your questions are already answered.
All of them, all.
Yes, please, Benny.
The ticking bomb dilemma. If you could explain it, I've heard about it, but please do elaborate.
The bomb dilemma is a situation that you have terrorists, 2 or 3 of them, captured. You know that there is a ticking bomb somewhere, and are you allowed to use torture to find out where they planted the bomb?
No.
You wouldn't?
No, I wouldn't. Under no circumstance would I do it, ever.
I didn't understand. You catch the question?
No, there's a ticking bomb which will kill 1,000 people. I will not torture, I will not hurt one person in order to do it. I will not become a person who will torture somebody else in order to save the whole of humanity. Because the moment you do that, you have condemned the whole of humanity. No, I won't do it. I think I won't do it. Probably my son is going to be killed. I'll kill them, probably, you know. I'm telling you, this is my theory about it. But the point is, I think in principle, no.
That's your experience by your political work that you've done?
Look, my experience is that if they said they're going to hurt your son, my son, I would probably go and do anything in relation to them. But I think that probably May God have mercy on my soul, I probably wouldn't. I hope I wouldn't, but maybe I would, you know. I don't know. When I'm in those situations are inhuman situations. There is no, the point about those situations is that they dehumanize you to the point where whatever decision you make, it's the wrong decision. Evil does that. Terror does that. And violence does that. Extreme violence does that. There are no good situations. And very often what I do is I write about those situations. I write about those problems. Now, I firmly believe that probably not. For instance, I believe in nonviolence very strongly. However, I also believe in the possibilities that people have the right to, you know, to rebel. There may be moments when violence is necessary, but I would work as hard as I possibly can. I'm not a saint, you know, and I don't want to be a sort of saint like that. But I was asked this question, by the way, on Chilean television. Because the problem is that the moment in which you answer yes to that question, you will answer yes to that question forever. Because there will always be a situation which can justify some form of violence. That's the problem. The problem is that Pinochet says, in order to save Chile, I had to torture 10,000 people. I had to exile you. Too bad, you know? What I mean is there's always a justification for it. So I think we just have to say no. I won't do it. Now, probably, you know, if my friends, my family were there, I would. But you know, probably, I'll tell you what I probably would do. To tell you the truth, I probably would grab a gun and kill myself. Because I probably would not be able, I would probably not be able.
And you won't save your son.
I probably wouldn't be able to do that. But I find it very, very difficult to think that I would do this. Let's say I hope not. And then, of course, I hope yes.
By the way, it's a current, it started before Israel, given the conflict of the last.
Oh, I understand. I understand the problem. It's asked over and over. I understand what the dilemma is like. But it's, once again, it's the dilemma of you throw the guy off the lifeboat or you don't throw the guy off the lifeboat. I mean, in any situation.
But all right.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, please. What?
Just as you have explained about the problem between the two languages, I want to ask, when you get an idea, a concept, a story in your head, how do you know, people that you do know, that this is a novel, or a short story, or a play, or a film? What is it that makes it one or the other?
I think it has to do with something which is, it's unexplainable in the sense that you don't, it's very difficult to articulate exactly why that happens, but words come with certain rhythms to them, and they presuppose in some strange way a sort of a generic response in a certain way of how something is happening. There are things, for instance, Death in the Maiden began as a novel. I wanted it as a novel, and for 9 years it didn't work as a novel. And you become wise enough to know when something isn't working as a novel. But for instance, I have a short story called Hide and Seek. It's My House is on Fire as a short story, and the same one is a poem. And it worked as a poem first, and then I did a story out of it because I felt there was more to do. And now, in fact, with Rodrigo, we've done a little screenplay of a short that we could film as a film. So the point is that I think that they fluctuate in genres, but the important thing is that you can take the same idea. To give you an idea, Widows began as just one short poem, but I knew there was something more to it. So what you do is you see it in a certain way. You see the voice in a certain way. And it has a lot to do with narration. For instance, why isn't Konfidenz a play? Well, for instance, because if it were a play, it would be enormously difficult to play with the reader the way I play with the reader. I know because I've been offered to make it into a play and I've refused so far. And in fact, this morning I had a meeting with a German director who wants to make it into a film, and we're discussing. Konfidenz, yes. And I've had several offers from sort of Hollywood people, and I don't want to go that way. But the point is, Konfidenz is very much about the terror of having the reader imagine faces behind the voices I don't describe hardly at all. So, and it's about voyeurism, you know, the sense of the narrator is a voyeur, there's an enemy who is a voyeur, the man is a voyeur of the woman who knows what she's doing, she's teaching little children to grab photographs, everybody is looking at somebody else. Now, how do you put that in film? I was speaking to one of the persons who I wanted to direct this, who was a friend of mine, called Atom Igoyen, you know, the Exotica, he did Exotica, the film, I don't know if you've seen it here. And Adam was saying to me, this is a very, if I were to do this as a film, this would be very literal. And I don't want to make he said, you know, your extraordinary sense of deftness of playing, I don't want to turn that into a camera. Because then it becomes about a camera watching people, you know? So there are things that call themselves to narration. And I felt that Konfidenz was like a Henry James novel, you know, which was there. He was the first one I did, only practically in the novel is a form which I think is the most protean of all forms. It allows you to do anything with any way. And you can fool people in ways that you can't fool them with any other way, you know. And even Who's Who, you know, is we fool people, I think, you know, totally in many different ways.
Yes.
Completely, right? I mean, you really fool people with everything that you're doing there. But that depends on the fact that what you're doing is you're staging something, and it's all about acting. It's about acting, actors acting. It probably wouldn't work as a novel. They want to do, for instance, Roman said to me, look, if you make a novelization of Death and the Maiden,
Roman Polanski.
Roman Polanski said to me, make a novelization, not you, but somebody who we had, a French guy, you know, who would do this. We publicize the film and we do that, and I said, no, there's no way I'm going to have you novelize this. And I put in the contract, we were discussing with Warner Brothers, and they said, well, so we get the novelization. I said, look, I don't care if we don't make the film. I'm not letting this story be told by anybody else, you know? I don't want it told as a novel. If it were told as a novel, it would be something different. So there's a sense in which you know, but it has to do with what the genre is and what it calls to itself, how the forms that it explores, you know, and there are reasons for that. And there are hybrid genres as well.
Listen, Ariel.
Yes, please.
I'm going to stop you, but
Yes.
I'm not really stopping you. I'm interrupting you. We're ending this session. We go to the other room, and whoever likes can
Yes.
come and discuss, and I don't know what. We are glad we have your novel.
Yes.
If it will be a film, we'll see. And we hope to see who's who. I would love to see it on the stage.
Yes,
And we'll see what it becomes, a musical and opera film.
I wanted just to say, you know, Anne in particular, you have been so gracious and so gentle and hospitable with me. You must remember that this is a city that gave me refuge for many years and that very clearly healed me when I came with great sickness in my soul and with my family. We were very, very sick, very sad, very alone in the world. And this city received me with a sisterhood which I, you know, will never forget. And I come back here all the time. But to come here as a Chilean, quote, American, in my new double identity, where I am the same Ariel with, you know, I haven't changed in that sense. I feel very, very comfortable coming to the Jan Adams Stichting Institute, having been part of a series. And I do hope that, you know, that the United States understands that when we did our independence, we looked to the United States as the beacon in our world. And I would hope that someday this relationship between Latin America and the United States would continue to be one of true and deep friendship in which we learn from each other. And I am a bridge where that learning is happening all the time. So I'm very glad, you know, to be here, and I feel very privileged to have been part of this series that had, you know, friends like Dr. Ov and John Irving and Susan Sontag and people like that. I'm really very, very pleased to be one of you.
Well, we're very pleased that you came and that you
And
shared
thank you so much.
with us your views and your work and your thoughts, and also Max Arian. And I think we all feel happy that we were privileged to have been present at your the premiere of Who's Who.
It is. It's the first time it's ever been read publicly.
Those of you who will have to catch a train, please feel free to leave. We'll have a drink in the bar, and if you want to stay, please stay. The next lecture will be with Joan Brady on the 10th of April, and you're very welcome to be there. Thank you.